Black pregnant widowed maid bought a storage unit full of junk. What she saw inside changed everything. Stacy Tucker stood frozen in front of the open storage unit, the late afternoon sun cutting through the dust-filled air. Her blue maid uniform clung to her skin, damp with sweat. One hand rested on her pregnant belly, the other holding the lid of a leather briefcase she had just pulled from beneath a pile of old blankets. Her dark skin glistened in the heat, and her tired eyes searched the worn papers inside. In her pocket was a crumpled $20 bill, the last money she had to her name. Her breath caught as she lifted a photograph from the briefcase. A young black woman in a nurse's uniform stood beside a white man in a military outfit. The date read 1967. On the back, a handwritten note, Catherine and Harold. Harold. That was her employer's late husband. What Stacy was about to discover in this forgotten storage unit would reveal a family secret that had been buried for over 50 years. A secret that would prove her late husband was never who she thought he was. But how did a poor maid's desperate $20 gamble lead to uncovering a truth that would change multiple lives forever? Stay with us, because this story will leave you speechless. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from, and please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more powerful stories like this one. Tomorrow, we're dropping another incredible story you won't want to miss. Now come as we take you back to how it all began. 8 months before the day at the storage unit, Stacy Tucker's world shattered in a single phone call. Her husband, Marcus, had been working at a construction site when a beam collapsed without warning. By the time Stacy reached the hospital, the hallways smelled of antiseptic and sorrow. Marcus was gone. The doctor's words blurred, the room spun, and all she could think about was the child growing inside her and how she would tell them one day that their father was brave but taken too soon. The funeral was small. A cheap coffin, borrowed chairs, and the sound of rain tapping on umbrellas. Marcus's co-workers collected some money for her, but it barely covered the burial. His life insurance had expired a month earlier when he switched companies, leaving Stacy with nothing but grief and medical bills. That night, in their small one-room apartment, she sat on the edge of the bed clutching his old work shirt, whispering promises to the unborn baby inside her. "I'll find a way. I don't know how, but I will." Now, 8 months later, Stacy's mornings began before dawn. At 5 a.m., the alarm buzzed, and she forced herself up from the thin mattress. The apartment was cramped, a single window, peeling paint, and a flickering bulb that hummed louder than her thoughts. Her hand moved to her belly, feeling the baby's faint kicks. She smiled for a moment before the weight of her situation came flooding back. Bills on the counter. The eviction notice from Mrs. Chen slipped under the door 2 days ago. Rent overdue. Power bill unpaid. She had 10 days before the lights went out. She moved quietly, not wanting to wake the neighbors through the thin walls. Breakfast was a piece of bread and a cup of weak tea. Her shoes were worn, the soles patched with glue, and her uniform smelled faintly of bleach no matter how many times she washed it. Every morning, she whispered the same prayer before stepping outside, "Just let me make it through today." By 6:30, she was walking up the long driveway of the Riverside estate, the mansion she'd cleaned for the past 3 years. The property stretched wide, its manicured gardens a world away from her tiny apartment. The stone fountain sparkled in the sunlight, and for a brief second, Stacy wondered what it must feel like to live without worrying about tomorrow. Mrs. Patricia Drummond, the owner, was kind but distant. At 82, she moved slowly, her silver hair always perfectly arranged. She often spoke with the politeness of someone raised to be proper but rarely personal. Even so, she had treated Stacy better than most employers. After Marcus's death, Mrs. Drummond offered extra shifts and let Stacy take time off for doctor visits. "You're a strong woman, dear," she'd said once while Stacy was polishing the silverware. Marcus would be proud. The word stuck with her, kind, but still carrying the formality of employer and employee. Every corner of the Riverside estate reminded Stacy of her place. The marble floors reflected her worn shoes, the grand portraits of the Drummond family watched her from the walls, and the silence made every movement sound too loud. Yet she worked with quiet focus, scrubbing floors, dusting antiques, folding linens, and reminding herself that every dollar earned was another step toward her baby's future. One afternoon, as Stacy was organizing the study, Mrs. Drummond called her in with a weary tone. Papers were spread across the desk, old letters, faded receipts, and family photographs. "I've been sorting through my husband's things," she said softly. "There's a storage unit I've been paying for, must be 30 years now. I hardly remember what's in it." She gave a tired smile. "I'm thinking of letting it go. Some doors are better left closed." Stacy paused, curious but careful not to pry. "Would you like me to help sort through it?" "Oh no, dear," Mrs. Drummond said, waving a fragile hand. "It's being auctioned next week. I don't need reminders of the past." Something in her voice made Stacy look up. There was sadness there, something deeper than nostalgia. But she didn't ask. Instead, she nodded and continued dusting the shelves, unaware that the few words spoken that day would soon change her life completely. That night, back in her apartment, Stacy sat on the edge of her bed staring at the stack of unpaid bills. The eviction notice lay on top, the red letters almost glowing in the dim light. She placed her hand on her belly again and whispered, "Hold on, baby. I'll find a way." But deep down, she had no idea how. All she had left was $20 in her purse and a growing fear that tomorrow might be worse than today. That night, after finishing her shift at Riverside Estate, Stacy sat at the small table in her apartment, her dinner untouched. The silence of the room pressed in on her. Her phone screen glowed dimly as she typed Riverside Storage Auction into the search bar. It didn't take long to find the listing. Unit 847. The pictures were dull and grainy, stacks of cardboard boxes, an old dresser missing a drawer, and what looked like a trunk pushed against the back wall. To anyone else, it looked like trash. But something about it held Stacy's attention. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was desperation. She enlarged the photo, squinting at the blurry shapes, wondering if anything inside could be worth something, even a few dollars to cover groceries. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Her mind was torn. $20. Her last 20. Enough to buy bread, milk, and baby wipes, maybe even a few vegetables from the market. But what if there was something valuable in that storage unit? People found treasures in old boxes all the time. Jewelry, antiques, forgotten collections. She told herself that stories like that were rare, just lucky breaks for other people. But still, she couldn't stop thinking about it. By midnight, she had made up her mind. "It's just $20, she whispered. "Maybe this is the chance I've been praying for." The next morning, George's heat hit hard before the sun was fully up. Stacy borrowed Mrs. Chen's rusty pickup truck, promising to return it before evening. The engine coughed and rattled as she drove toward the facility, every mile filled with second thoughts. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel, and she whispered to her belly, "We'll be okay, baby. I'm doing this for us." When she arrived, a small crowd had already gathered outside the chain-link gate. About 20 people, most of them experienced bidders. Stacy could tell by their clothes, casual but practical, and the way they carried clipboards, flashlights, and folding ladders. They talked loudly, joking about past auctions and sharing tips. A few looked at Stacy with faint curiosity, others with quiet amusement. She was clearly out of place. No equipment, no experience, just a pregnant woman in a faded maid's uniform holding a paddle with the number 17. The auctioneer, A tall man with a sunburned neck and mirrored sunglasses shouted over the crowd. "All right, folks, let's get started. You know the rules. You bid, you buy, you clear it out within 48 hours." The group moved from one unit to another. Each door rolled up with a heavy clang, revealing dusty piles of forgotten life. Some units sparked quick bidding wars. Others ended in silence. Stacy followed quietly, heart pounding. Every time a unit sold, her hope sank a little lower. When they reached Unit 847, she stood toward the back, clutching her paddle. The metal door screeched open. Dust burst into the air, catching sunlight like glitter. Inside was chaos: water-damaged boxes, an overturned chair, old linen spilling from a suitcase. A dull smell of wood and age rolled out. The seasoned bidders didn't hesitate. Most took one glance and moved away. "Junk," one muttered. "Not worth the gas," another said, turning his back. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Do I hear $20 to start?" No hands went up. Stacy's heart thudded painfully. $20. That was all she had. The baby kicked lightly, as if reminding her of why she was here. Before she could stop herself, her hand rose. "Paddle 17, $20. The auctioneer called, half surprised. He scanned the crowd. Any other bids? Going once, going twice. He banged his gavel. "Sold. To paddle 17. Laughter rippled through the group. A woman near the front shook her head. She just paid $20 for a pile of garbage. Stacy's stomach twisted. For a moment, the rush of adrenaline faded, replaced by regret. What had she done? $20. Gone. She stared into the dark unit, her heart sinking. The heat, the stairs, the smell, it all felt heavier now. The auctioneer handed her a slip of paper. "You've got 48 hours to clear it out. Congratulations." "Thanks," she murmured, her voice barely audible. As the crowd dispersed, Stacy stood alone, staring at her purchase. She had no one to help, no truck big enough to haul the mess, and a body that tired faster every day. The sun burned on her back, and sweat rolled down her temples. She pressed a hand to her belly, whispering, "What have I done?" The storage unit loomed before her, a mountain of other people's junk and her own uncertain future. Somewhere deep inside, she felt a quiet pull, a strange sense that she wasn't done yet. But all she could do for now was close the door, lock it, and promise herself she'd be back in the morning. When she climbed into the pickup, exhaustion hit like a wave. The steering wheel was hot under her hands. She looked once more in the mirror at the row of metal doors stretching into the distance. Each one held someone's forgotten story. Hers, she feared, might end as just another failed gamble in a life already filled with too many losses. Yet something in her chest whispered, "Go back tomorrow. There's more waiting for you inside." The next morning, the Georgia sun climbed early, sharp and unforgiving. Stacy drove Mrs. Chen's old pickup back to the storage facility, its engine wheezing like an exhausted animal. The memory of yesterday's laughter from the other bidders still clung to her, a quiet humiliation that burned deeper than the heat. But she wasn't one to back down. Not now. Not when she'd spent her last $20 on this gamble. She parked by Unit 847, grabbed a pair of gloves she'd borrowed from the kitchen at work, and pulled open the metal door. The smell of stale dust and mildew hit her immediately. Sunlight sliced through the space, revealing the chaos inside. Boxes stacked unevenly, furniture leaning like tired soldiers, and piles of blankets that had once been white but were now yellowed with time. "All right," she muttered to herself, rubbing her aching lower back. "Let's see what we've got." She started methodically, pulling out boxes one by one. Inside the first were old linens, embroidered pillowcases, lace tablecloths, yellowed sheets. She folded them aside, thinking maybe she could wash and sell a few at the thrift store. The next box held women's clothing from another era, high-waisted skirts, floral dresses, and wide-brimmed hats that smelled faintly of mothballs. The tags bore store names she didn't recognize, some dated as far back as 1972. A crate of chipped kitchenware followed, tarnished utensils, pastel plates, and a heavy coffee percolator that must have been from the 1960s. Each piece told a story of a life long lived and long forgotten. But none of it had any real value. As sweat gathered on her temples, she sank to the floor, breathing heavily. "Nothing but junk," she said aloud, her voice trembling between disappointment and exhaustion. Her eyes caught something then, a corner of brown leather sticking out from beneath a pile of moth-eaten blankets. She tugged it free, a weathered briefcase with brass locks and a faded monogram stamped near the handle, HD. Her pulse quickened. "Please don't be empty," she whispered, flicking open the latches. Inside lay a neat stack of papers, still crisp despite the years. The top page bore a letterhead that read Drummond and Associates, attorneys at law. Her heart skipped. The name Drummond, the same as the family she used to work for. She shuffled through the documents, property deeds, business agreements, and legal correspondences, all under the name Harold Drummond. The handwriting was neat, old-fashioned. But it was what lay beneath the papers that stopped her cold, a black-and-white photograph. Two young people smiled at the camera, standing in front of a porch draped with vines. The man was unmistakable, Harold Drummond, though decades younger. Beside him stood a woman Stacy had never seen before, her arm looped affectionately through his. Written on the back in fading ink, Harold and Catherine, 1967. Stacy frowned. "Catherine," she murmured. Mrs. Drummond's maiden name had been Patterson, not Williams, not anything close to Catherine. A strange unease crawled up her spine. Who was this woman, and why were her things here? She kept digging, her gloved hands brushing past yellowed documents and faded photographs until her fingers hit something hard. Pushing aside a stack of old books, she uncovered a small metal lockbox. Rusted. Heavy. No key. Her pulse raced. Maybe this was what everyone else had missed. Maybe this was her chance. She dragged the box out into the sunlight, grabbed a screwdriver from the truck, and jammed it into the seam. The metal groaned, refusing to give. She tried again, sweat dripping down her neck, muttering prayers under her breath. After several tries, the lid popped open with a sharp metallic snap. Inside were papers tied with faded ribbon, a folded birth certificate, and a bundle of letters neatly bound with string. She lifted the certificate first, her eyes scanning the faded type. Name, Baby Boy Drummond. Date of birth, March 14, 1968. Father, Harold Drummond. Mother, Catherine Williams. Stacy froze. Her hands trembled as she read the names again. Catherine Williams, not Patterson. That meant Mrs. Drummond wasn't Harold's first wife. There had been someone else before her. Someone he had loved. Someone he had abandoned. Her breath came faster. "Oh my God," she whispered. The realization hit her like a wave. This wasn't junk. It was a buried piece of someone's life, a secret the Drummond family had tried to erase. Heart pounding, she untied the string around the letters and unfolded the first one. The ink was smudged but still legible. It began. "My dearest Harold, I can't sleep tonight knowing the choice you face tomorrow. They don't see us as human, only as a scandal waiting to destroy their reputation. But our baby deserves more than silence. Please, don't let them decide our future for us." The signature at the bottom read, Catherine. Stacy read through several more letters, her vision blurring as she went. Each one painted a vivid picture of forbidden love, a young white businessman and a black woman in Georgia, 1967, fighting against the prejudice that surrounded them. Catherine's words were filled with hope at first, dreams of running away, of raising their child in peace. But as the letters went on, the tone darkened. The final letter made Stacy's throat tighten. They said they'll disown you, Harold. Take away the company, the inheritance, everything your father built. And I saw it in your eyes tonight, the fear of losing it all. If you walk away from me, I'll understand, but I'll never stop loving you, even if our son grows up never knowing your name. There were no replies from Harold, only Catherine's aching words. The last letter was dated May 1968, just 2 months after the baby's birth. Stacy sat back against a broken dresser, holding the letters to her chest. The world outside felt still, as if even the wind had stopped to listen. Harold Drummond, the man whose house she had scrubbed clean for years, had a past no one ever spoke of. A child, born in secret. A love forbidden by the times. She imagined Catherine alone, raising a baby in a world that refused to accept her, writing letters that would never be answered. And then Harold, choosing wealth and legacy over love. For a long while, Stacy didn't move. The truth was heavier than any box she had lifted that morning. When she finally looked up, her eyes burned with a strange mix of sadness and determination. Maybe she hadn't just bought a pile of junk after all. Maybe she had uncovered a truth that someone had buried, and it was calling to her to make it right. As the afternoon sun slanted through the open door, the letters glowed faintly in her hands, as if whispering that this was only the beginning. Stacy sat in the dim storage unit, surrounded by open boxes, her knees pressed into the dusty floor. The air was heavy with the scent of old paper and memories that refused to stay buried. She reached for the next bundle of letters, their edges brittle, bound together by a fraying blue ribbon. Her fingers trembled as she untied it, not knowing that what she was about to read would change everything she thought she knew about her life. The letters continued the story that had begun years earlier, Catherine writing from a small apartment on the edge of town. Her words had grown weary, her optimism faded. In one note, she spoke of being sick often, of struggling to find work while caring for her infant son. In another, she confessed she hadn't heard from Harold in months. The last one in her handwriting was short, almost rushed. If anything happens to me, promise me you'll find him. Our boy deserves to know his father tried. His name is Marcus. The next document wasn't a letter but a newspaper clipping folded neatly among the pages. Stacy smoothed it out and read the headline aloud under her breath. Local woman dies in tragic car crash, leaves infant son behind. The date read June 1970. Catherine Williams was 25 years old. Stacy's throat tightened. Her heart thudded painfully against her ribs as she scanned the article. There was mention of the baby, uninjured, taken into temporary foster care while authorities searched for next of kin. But there was no mention of Harold Drummond, no acknowledgement of the child's father. The next item in the lockbox was a letter typed on an old typewriter, dated 2 years later. It was from Harold's family attorney. The letter's cold precision made Stacy shiver as she read. Mr. Drummond, in accordance with your parents' wishes, further efforts to claim the child of Miss Williams have been deemed inadvisable. Pursuing custody or acknowledgement could endanger your inheritance and public reputation. The matter is best considered closed. Her hands went still. They stopped him, she whispered. They took his own child away from him. She reached for another envelope, marked 1985, Private Investigator Report. The paper was yellowed but intact. She read the first page slowly, her eyes tracing each word as if a mind refused to process them all at once. Subject: Marcus Drummond, adopted as Marcus Tucker, born March 14, 1968. Biological father: Harold Drummond. Adoptive status confirmed. Current records indicate residence in Fulton County Foster Network. No confirmed location after 1981. For a heartbeat, Stacy couldn't breathe. Her vision blurred. The world seemed to tilt around her, everything slipping out of focus except for one name, Marcus Tucker. Her Marcus. The paper trembled in her hands as if her body no longer obeyed her. No, she whispered, voice breaking. She read it again, hoping she'd misread it. But it was there in black and white. Marcus Tucker, her husband. The man she'd buried only months earlier. Her knees gave out, and she sank hard onto the concrete floor, one hand instinctively moving to cradle her belly. Marcus, she whispered through shaking breaths. You were his son. Tears burned her eyes as the truth crashed over her in waves. Her husband, the man who'd struggled his whole life to find belonging, had been searching for a family he never knew he already had. And the baby growing inside her was not just his child, but Harold Drummond's grandchild. The circle had closed in the most impossible way. She pressed a trembling hand against her chest, feeling her heart race like it was trying to escape. Her thoughts scattered, memories of Marcus as a boy in foster care, the way he'd talk about never knowing his real family, how he used to say, some things just aren't meant to be found. But they were found. Right here, in a dusty storage unit no one wanted. Stacy wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, but the tears kept coming. She turned back to the box, her eyes catching on a small wooden jewelry case tucked beneath the stack of letters. The lid creaked when she opened it. Inside was a gold ring engraved with a family crest, a stylized letter D surrounded by laurel leaves. Beside it was a folded note, the ink faded but still legible. For my son, should he ever be found. H.D. She clutched the ring tightly, her body shaking as sobs tore through her. Marcus had lived his whole life not knowing that his father had tried, that somewhere, buried under guilt and silence, Harold Drummond had wanted him back. But by the time he searched, it had been too late. Every breath Stacy took felt like it scraped against her ribs. Her tears dropped onto the letters, smudging the words written decades before. You never knew, she whispered, her voice trembling. You never knew he was looking for you. She leaned her head against the edge of the wooden crate, her other hand resting protectively over her belly. Your father was a Drummond, she said softly to the unborn child. And you're all that's left of him. The room felt smaller now, the silence pressing in on her. It wasn't just grief that filled her chest, it was a deep, aching awareness of connection, of history looping back on itself. She had scrubbed the floors of her husband's father's mansion, served tea to the woman who had unknowingly married into the very secret that destroyed a family. She looked down at the ring again, its surface glinting faintly in the fading light. For the first time in months, Stacy didn't feel entirely alone. She was holding proof of love lost, of mistakes buried, and of a legacy that still had a heartbeat. With a deep, shuddering breath, she pressed the ring against her palm and whispered, I'll make sure he knows. All of them. The storage unit had gone quiet. The late afternoon light slanted through the open door, touching the stacks of old boxes like they were waiting to be noticed. Stacy sat still, surrounded by the evidence of a past that wasn't supposed to find her. She had just discovered that her late husband, Marcus, was the lost son of Harold Drummond, the very man whose wife she worked for. Her tears had barely dried when she noticed another envelope at the bottom of the crate, sealed and slightly yellowed, with faint writing on the front. It read, To whoever finds this. The handwriting stopped her breath. It was neat, practiced, familiar. Mrs. Drummond's. Her pulse quickened. With shaking hands, she peeled the flap open. Inside was a folded letter, several pages thick. The first line made her heart thud. If you're reading this, it means the truth has finally found its way out. I don't know who you are, but I owe you, and Harold, a confession I could never say aloud. Stacy swallowed hard and began to read. Patricia's words were steady, but the weight of guilt bled through every sentence. She confessed she had learned the truth shortly after Harold's death in 1993. Cleaning out his study, she had found a small box hidden behind books on his shelf, letters addressed to Catherine, photographs, and the same private investigator's report that now lay before Stacy. I sat there for hours that night, Patricia wrote. I had loved Harold for 40 years, but for the first time, I realized I had never truly known him. He had carried his guilt quietly, punishing himself for a choice that tore apart 3 lives. When I read those letters, I saw not betrayal, but regret. And I made a promise to find the son he had lost. The letter continued with a tone that shifted between confession and sorrow. Patricia described her search. For years, she had hired investigators discreetly, tracing adoption records and cross-referencing names. Most leads went nowhere. Then, in 2015, she found him. Marcus Tucker. Your husband. He had just married you that summer, and I remember staring at your wedding photo for hours. The resemblance to Harold was unmistakable, the same eyes, the same smile. I knew I'd found him. Stacy's throat tightened. Her hand pressed against her chest as she kept reading. I wanted to reach out, to tell him who he was. But I was afraid. He had built a life of peace, and I didn't want to destroy it with my guilt. So, I watched quietly from a distance. I learned that you both lived modestly, that you worked hard, that you were expecting your first child. Every time I saw your name in the hospital's cleaning roster, my heart twisted. I wanted to speak to you both, but cowardice won every time. Stacy blinked through tears, her body trembling. When Marcus died in that accident, something in me broke. I had waited too long. My silence had stolen from him the truth he deserved. You came to work for me months later, and I knew it was no coincidence. The agency said your name, and I froze. I told them to send you. I told myself it was so I could help you. But the truth? I couldn't bear to let you out of my sight. You were the closest I could ever get to the grandson I'd lost. Stacy's breath hitched. The truth of her employment, the strange kindness, the extra hours, the way Patricia always looked at her belly with quiet emotion, suddenly made sense. Patricia's words grew softer, as if written with a trembling hand. You were never just my maid, Stacy. You were family long before you knew it. I watched you sweep the same halls where Harold once walked, and every time you smiled, I saw both of them, Harold and Marcus. I wanted to tell you, but I thought you'd hate me. I thought you'd see me as the woman who helped bury a secret that caused decades of pain. The pages rustled as Stacy turned to the final part of the letter. Everything Harold left behind, I've placed in trust. The deeds to the Riverside estate and the adjoining lands are to be released to Harold's rightful bloodline. That includes you and the child you carry. The total value exceeds $2 million. But money isn't why I'm writing. I'm writing because I can't leave this world without saying I'm sorry. You were never meant to live in struggle while I lived surrounded by comfort that wasn't truly mine. You are the living proof that love survives even the worst choices. The closing lines were simple, but they cut deep. If you ever find this, please forgive me. Take what's rightfully yours. Build something good out of what we ruined. And know that from the first day you walked through my door, I loved you, not as my maid, but as my family. Patricia Drummond. Stacy sat motionless, the letter trembling in her hands. Her emotions twisted into a storm: anger, sorrow, gratitude, disbelief. Patricia had known all along. She'd known Marcus was her grandson. She'd known Stacy was carrying the next generation of their shared bloodline. And she had kept it buried out of fear. The walls of the storage unit seemed to close in. Stacy pressed her forehead against the paper, tears streaking her cheeks. The ache in her chest was almost too much to bear. She thought of all the mornings she had served Patricia breakfast, all the days she'd polished the same banister Marcus's father once touched. Patricia had been kind, but now Stacy understood why. It was guilt, not just generosity. Yet there was love too, woven through every decision, every hesitation. Her thoughts swirled. How Marcus had grown up without knowing where he came from, how Patricia had lived decades haunted by what she couldn't undo, and how fate had placed Stacy right at the center of their unfinished story. By the time the last light faded from the sky, Stacy folded the letter carefully and held it close to her chest. Her tears had softened into quiet resolve. Tomorrow, she would return to Riverside Estate, not as a maid, but as Harold Drummond's daughter-in-law and Patricia's rightful family. What waited there would either break them both or finally bring peace. The drive back to Riverside Estate felt longer than usual. The late evening sky was bruised purple, streaked with clouds that seemed to hang low over the empty roads. Stacy's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, the sealed folder resting on the passenger seat beside her. Inside were the documents that had appended everything she thought she knew: Patricia Drummond's confession letter, the property deeds, and the trust fund papers. When the mansion came into view, its grand silhouette looked less imposing than before and more like a relic of secrets finally uncovered. She parked slowly, her heart pounding as she stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath her shoes. Each step toward the entrance felt like crossing a line she could never retreat from. Inside, the house was quiet except for the faint hum of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The portraits along the walls, Drummonds of generations past, seemed to watch her, their eyes heavy with the weight of history. For the first time, Stacy didn't feel like a guest or an employee walking these halls. This was her husband's family home, her son's inheritance. The realization sent a chill through her. She found Patricia in her usual spot in the sitting room, wrapped in a shawl, her posture fragile yet proud. A cup of untouched tea rested on the side table. The older woman looked up at Stacy's approach, her expression shifting from mild surprise to quiet dread when she saw the folder. "You knew," Stacy said softly at first, her voice trembling, then stronger. "All this time, you knew." The silence that followed was unbearable. Patricia's thin fingers tightened around the armrest. Her eyes glistened, but she said nothing. "Why didn't you tell me?" Stacy continued, stepping closer. "You knew Marcus was Harold's son. You knew before he died, before I married him. You let me work here as your maid while knowing I was family." Patricia's lips parted, her breath shallow. "I wanted to. Every day, I wanted to." Her voice cracked, frail and shaking. "But I couldn't. I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of destroying what you had," Patricia whispered. "After Harold died, I found out the truth about his son, your husband. But by the time I tracked him down, he was already gone. And then, I saw you. You were his wife, carrying his child, working hard to survive. I couldn't take that away from you by revealing everything. I'd already lost one son to guilt. I couldn't bear losing another through truth." Her shoulders quivered as she wiped her tears with a trembling hand. "I offered you that job because I wanted to be close to him, through you. It was selfish, I know. Every kindness, every gesture was a coward's way of reaching for a family I'd already lost." Stacy's throat tightened. The folder slipped from her hand and landed softly on the rug. Inside it lay the papers that proved everything Patricia was saying. Proof of her guilt, her attempts to make amends, her silent longing to reconnect. "How do you tell someone," Patricia said through tears, "that everything, the job, the way I looked after you, the way I kept checking on you, was my desperate, cowardly way of staying connected to the grandson I'd never meet?" Stacy stood frozen, her heart in chaos. She wanted to scream, to accuse, to demand why Patricia hadn't spoken sooner. But beneath the anger was something softer, understanding. This woman had been carrying decades of pain, bound by fear and remorse. Her mind flickered with memories. Patricia quietly leaving warm soup outside her door after Marcus's funeral, the way she'd offered gentle words when Stacy couldn't stop crying, how she'd insisted on driving her to doctor appointments even when she claimed to be too busy. The baby inside Stacy shifted suddenly, a small, firm kick that caught her breath. She placed a hand on her belly instinctively, the pulse of life grounding her in the moment. She looked back at Patricia, seeing not the deceiver she'd imagined, but a woman broken by choices that had once felt like survival. Patricia tried to speak again, but her words came out as a sob. I should have told him. I should have told both of you. But every time I saw you, I convinced myself that keeping quiet was kindness. That ignorance would protect what happiness you had left. Tears blurred Stacy's vision. She walked closer, her anger melting into exhaustion. Patricia's frail form seemed even smaller now, dwarfed by guilt and time. Finally, Stacy sank to her knees beside her, reaching for Patricia's weathered hands. The older woman flinched at first, then gripped Stacy's fingers tightly, as if afraid to let go. You gave Marcus work when he had nothing, Stacy said softly, her voice steady despite the tears. You've been kind to me even when I didn't deserve it. Maybe you made mistakes, but you were family to us before we knew it. Patricia broke down completely, her sobs shaking her fragile frame. Stacy leaned forward, resting her forehead against the older woman's knuckles, both of them crying, for the years lost, for the truth buried too long, for the man they both loved in different ways. The house felt alive around them again. The ticking clock seemed gentler, the air warmer. For the first time, silence wasn't a wall, it was peace. Patricia reached up and touched Stacy's cheek with trembling fingers. You remind me of him, she whispered. The way you forgive. Stacy smiled faintly through her tears. Maybe that's his last gift to both of us. They sat like that for a long while, two generations of women bound not by blood or duty, but by love, loss, and the courage to finally face the truth together. Outside, the night deepened, but in the heart of the mansion, something finally began to heal. The weeks that followed were a quiet transformation, subtle at first, but undeniable. Stacy packed up the little apartment that had once felt like both refuge and reminder of everything she'd lost. The walls were bare now, the air still carrying faint traces of baby powder and Marcus's cologne. Patricia had been insistent. You're not staying here another night, she'd said. That child deserves a home, not a rented corner of memory. By the end of that week, Stacy moved into the guest house on the estate grounds, a cozy cottage surrounded by oak trees and the faint hum of the river beyond the property. It was smaller than the mansion, but it had warmth. Patricia made sure the place was furnished with care, even bringing some of her late husband Harold's old tools to hang in the garage, saying he'd have wanted them used again. Their relationship took on a new rhythm. Each morning, Stacy would walk up the stone path to the main house with a folder or a mug of tea, while Patricia waited by the window, eager for company. What had once been awkward politeness grew into a bond that neither had expected. One afternoon, while sorting through boxes from the attic, Patricia opened a worn cardboard container labeled Harold's keepsakes. Inside were old photographs, faded letters, and a small wooden toy car. He made this for Marcus, she murmured, running her fingers along its chipped edge. He didn't know where to send it. That discovery opened floodgates of stories, about Harold's regrets, Catherine's courage, and the years of silence that followed. In return, Stacy shared her own, stories of Marcus as a husband, the way he'd hum to himself when fixing a leaky faucet, or how he'd saved every grocery receipt to make sure they stayed on budget. Patricia listened, her eyes wet but her smile steady. He sounds just like his father, she'd whisper. Together, they pieced together the missing chapters of Marcus's life. Patricia had hired a private investigator years ago, she confessed, to learn about Harold's son. He went through 3 foster homes before someone finally saw him for who he was, she said softly. I used to pray that he'd forgive me if he ever knew. Legal matters came next. With Patricia's lawyer's help, Stacy began formalizing the inheritance. The property deeds were transferred to her name, along with the trust fund Harold had left untouched since 1974, now worth well over $2 million. The process felt surreal. For years she'd been scraping by, counting every dollar, and now signatures and seals turned struggle into security. But more than wealth, it brought her a sense of belonging. "I don't want this to change who I am," she told Patricia as they sat in the study one afternoon. "It won't," Patricia replied gently. "You've already been tested by life. Money can't spoil a heart that's been broken and healed the way yours has." Patricia, too, was changing. The woman who had once kept to herself now filled her days with purpose, organizing old family albums, writing notes for Stacy's unborn child, and even attending prenatal appointments. The guilt that had once defined her began to fade, replaced by quiet pride. "I thought I was waiting to die," she admitted one evening as they watched the sunset from the porch. "Now I'm waiting to meet him." Their biggest project together became the nursery. Patricia insisted on transforming one of the guest house rooms into a haven of warmth and memory. They painted the walls soft cream, hung lace curtains, and placed a rocking chair in the corner, the same one Stacy had found in the storage unit months before. "This chair has seen 3 generations," Patricia said with a tender smile. "Harold rocked Marcus in it when he was a baby. I suppose it's time it held another." They unpacked boxes of heirlooms Patricia had kept hidden for decades. Harold's baby clothes carefully wrapped in linen, Catherine's nursing school photograph, and an embroidered blanket with the initials HD stitched into the corner. Patricia handed them over with reverence, her hands trembling. "These belong here now," she said. Every item had a story, and every story brought them closer. They spent hours talking, about Marcus's laugh, about the way grief sometimes hides in the smallest habits, about what it meant to start over when the past still lingered in every shadow. One evening, as they folded baby clothes, Patricia's tone turned wistful. "I used to dream about meeting Marcus," she said softly. "I'd imagine what I'd say if I had 1 minute with him. I think I would have just said I was sorry." Stacy's voice broke a little. "He would have forgiven you. He was that kind of man." Patricia nodded, her eyes glassy. "And now I get to do what I never could, help raise his child. Life doesn't often give second chances, but somehow, I got mine." In the following weeks, Stacy's belly grew rounder, her movement slower, but her spirit lighter. The mansion no longer felt like a place of ghosts. It was alive again, full of laughter, shared meals, and late-night planning sessions for the baby's arrival. One morning, Stacy announced her decision over breakfast. "I want to start something in Marcus's name," she said. "A foundation to help widows and single mothers, people like me who just need one person to believe in them." Patricia's face lit up with pride. That's exactly what he'd want. That's how you honor him. But as the weeks passed, Patricia's health began to wane. The doctors called it age catching up, but Stacy could see the deeper cause, decades of guilt and loneliness slowly giving way to peace. She tired easily now, yet her smile grew softer, her laughter more frequent. "You've given me something medicine never could," Patricia told her one evening as Stacy helped her to bed. "You've given me family again." Stacy brushed a hand over her shoulder. "You gave it to me first." In that house where secrets had once festered, a new story was being written, one of forgiveness, renewal, and love rediscovered. Patricia spent her mornings knitting small blankets, her afternoons telling the baby stories he'd someday hear again, and her evenings sitting by the window, watching the sunset over the estate she now saw as home, not penance. By the time spring arrived, both women had transformed. Stacy, once a struggling widow, had become the keeper of a legacy. Patricia, once a lonely guardian of secrets, had become a grandmother in waiting. And in the space between them, filled with laughter, tears, and late-night whispers, a family had been built, not by blood alone, but by the courage to forgive and begin again. 3 months later, the quiet hum of dawn was broken by Stacy's sharp gasp. At first, She thought it was just another restless night, but when the second pain came, deeper and undeniable, she knew. The baby was coming. Within minutes, the guest house lights flickered on. Patricia, frail but alert, appeared at the door wrapped in her robe. "It's time, isn't it?" she asked, her voice trembling. Stacy nodded, gripping the back of a chair as another contraction seized her. "It's early, but yes, it's time." Despite her age, Patricia refused to stay behind. "I've missed enough births in this family," she said firmly, insisting on climbing into the ambulance beside Stacy. Her hand never left Stacy's through the bumpy ride. The siren wailed through the still Georgia morning, and though Patricia's breathing was labored, her eyes were bright, determined. At the hospital, nurses moved quickly. Stacy was wheeled into a delivery room, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale but resolute. Patricia stood at her side, gripping her hand with surprising strength. Between contractions, Stacy managed a faint smile. "You don't have to stay," she whispered. "I do," Patricia replied softly. "For him. For all of them." Hours passed in a blur of motion and emotion. Monitors beeped steadily, nurses offered words of encouragement, and Patricia whispered prayers under her breath. When Stacy thought she couldn't go on, Patricia leaned close, her tears mingling with Stacy's sweat. "You're stronger than you know," she whispered. "Marcus would be so proud of you." Then came a cry, loud, pure, and full of life. The doctor smiled. "It's a boy." Stacy's tears turned to laughter, exhaustion melting into awe as they placed the baby on her chest. Patricia's hand trembled as she reached out, barely touching his tiny arm. "He's perfect," she whispered. "My great-grandson." The name came naturally, as though written in their hearts long before the moment arrived, Marcus Harold Drummond Tucker. It carried the weight of generations, the father who never knew his heritage, the grandfather who lived with regret, the grandmother who finally found peace. When the birth certificate was filled out, Stacy took an extra moment to steady her pen before signing. Under grandmother, she carefully wrote Patricia Drummond. She looked up at the nurse, who smiled warmly. "That makes it official," she said. Patricia held the newborn not long after. Her hands, once frail and trembling, seemed steady now as she cradled him close. "You'll know where you come from," she whispered. "You'll know you were always loved, even before you were born." In the following days, the hospital room became a gathering place of both past and present. Mrs. Chen arrived with flowers, nearly speechless at the sight of Patricia in the rocking chair, the baby sleeping against her chest. "I almost didn't recognize you both," she said, laughing through tears. "Look at you, life's come full circle." Neighbors from Stacy's old apartment stopped by, their faces filled with surprise and joy. They'd heard whispers of the inheritance, but what struck them most was the peace on Stacy's face. Patricia spent hours talking to the baby, her voice steady and full of warmth. She told him about his grandfather Harold, who loved too late, about Catherine, who loved too bravely, and about Marcus, who loved just right. Stacy often watched quietly from her bed, tears tracing soft paths down her cheeks. In those moments, she saw the circle complete, the past finding its way back home through a single, perfect heartbeat. 6 months later, Riverside Estate was alive again. The dining room that had once felt hollow now echoed with laughter and the clink of dishes. At the head of the table sat Patricia, thinner but radiant, her eyes sparkling as she fed mashed carrots to baby Marcus in his high chair. The house had changed. What had once been a place of secrets was now a home of remembrance. Catherine's photo hung proudly above the fireplace, Harold's letters were preserved in a glass memory box, and the Drummond family ring rested in a small velvet case beside the baby's crib, waiting for the day he'd be old enough to understand. Stacy, dressed simply but with quiet confidence, stood to make a toast that evening. "To family," she said softly, raising her glass. To the ones we lost, the ones we found, and the ones who found us. Patricia's hand reached across the table to squeeze hers. To second chances, she added. As the night grew deeper, Stacy carried baby Marcus upstairs to the nursery, a soft, golden room that felt like sunlight in solid form. The same rocking chair from the storage unit sat by the window, polished and restored. She settled into it, holding the baby close as he drifted to sleep, his tiny fingers clutching her necklace. Through the window, the estate stretched beneath the moonlight, serene and whole. The air smelled faintly of magnolia and rain. Stacy looked around the room, the crib, the framed photos, the heirlooms, and thought of how it all began. A dusty storage unit. A $20 bid. A choice made out of desperation that led to everything she never knew she needed. Her heart swelled as she whispered to her son, "You changed everything before you even arrived." As his breathing slowed into soft sighs, Stacy rocked gently, her eyes glistening. For the first time in years, she felt entirely at peace, not because life had been easy, but because it had been redeemed. Her final thought drifted like a prayer. Sometimes the things the world discards hold the keys to everything we've been searching for. And sometimes, family isn't found. It finds you, hidden in the most unexpected places, waiting for someone brave enough to open the door. The chair creaked softly beneath her as dawn crept across the horizon. The legacy of pain, love, and redemption had finally come home. Stacy's story reminds us that miracles often come disguised as desperate chances, and that family can sometimes be hiding in plain sight, waiting to be found. What would you have done if you were in her place, standing in front of that old storage unit with only $20 to your name? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. We truly love hearing from our global family. If Stacy's journey touched your heart, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep sharing more powerful, true-to-life stories like this one. Tomorrow, we'll be bringing you another emotional story that you absolutely won't want to miss. Until then, remember this: sometimes, what others see as worthless can hold the greatest treasure of all: truth, love, and the family you never knew you had.